They didn't just forget my chair at the anniversary gala, they had it physically removed from the floor plan 3 days before the event, and nobody told me until I was standing in the doorway of the ballroom in Lake Como, watching a stranger in a navy gown sit where my place card should have been. I'm 34. My name is Hadley Ryan Whitaker, though for most of my adult life, my mother has introduced me as our other daughter, the quiet one. She used to say it like it was charming, as if quietness were a small inheritance she passed down to the wrong child. For 19 years, I have been the trustee of the Whitaker Estate Holdings. My grandfather, before he died, sat me down in his sunroom in Newport and put a brass key in my hand. He said, "Your sister will burn through everything by 40 if you let her. Your mother will help her do it. You're the only one in his family who knows the difference between owning something and being owned by it." I was 15. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I was 23, signing my first directive to release funds for the renovation of our property in Bruges. Since then, every euro that left our family accounts crossed my desk first. Every villa, every chartered yacht, every gallery opening in Paris that my mother liked to call a small gathering, all of it ran through me, and none of them ever said thank you. Not once. But this isn't a story about money. I want to say that early because the comments people leave on stories like mine always assume it is. This is a story about a chair that was supposed to have my name on it, and the 53rd anniversary of a company my grandfather built from a single freight contract in 1972, and the moment I finally understood that being needed is not the same as being loved. The gala was my idea. I planned it for 14 months. I chose the lake, the villa, the chef who flew in from Modena, the string quartet, the printers in Milan who hand-set the invitations on cotton paper. I wrote the speech my mother was supposed to give. I edited it 4 times because she kept calling at midnight saying she didn't like the word humble. She said it made her sound poor. The night before the gala, I flew in from Boston. I'd been finalizing the auction lots for the foundation portion of the evening, which was the only part of the event I genuinely cared about. We were raising money for a children's literacy program that my grandfather had quietly funded for 30 years. He'd asked me, on his deathbed, to keep it alive. I'd built the entire anniversary around it without ever telling my mother that was the real reason I'd planned the gala. She thought it was for her. I arrived at the villa around 6 in the evening. My sister Brooklyn was already on the terrace with our mother and her new husband, a man we all called the senator even though he hadn't held office in 11 years. Brooklyn waved at me without standing up. My mother didn't wave at all. She was looking at her phone and she said, without raising her eyes, "We've made some adjustments." I didn't ask what she meant. I learned a long time ago that asking my mother to clarify is the same as inviting her to humiliate you slowly. I went up to my room, changed clothes, and came back down to find the venue coordinator, a kind woman from Como named Allegra, standing in the foyer with a tablet pressed to her chest like a shield. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept saying, "Miss Whitaker, I was told the changes were approved by you." I asked her what changes. She turned the tablet around. There was a seating chart for the head table. 12 names. Mine wasn't on it. There was something else. The speaker list for the gala had been edited too. My name had been there, right under my mother's, for the foundation announcement. It was gone. In its place was Brooklyn's, my sister, who has never read a single annual report from the literacy program, who once asked me at Thanksgiving if Iliad was a perfume, was apparently giving the keynote about my grandfather's life's work. I asked Allegra who'd authorized the changes. She said my mother. I asked when. She said 3 days ago. I asked why no one had told me. She started to cry. I told her it wasn't her fault. I told her to go pour herself a glass of wine in the staff kitchen and to leave the situation to me. Then I walked out onto the terrace. My mother was laughing at something the senator had said. Brooklyn was scrolling. The lake was that color it gets in late September, somewhere between Mercury and Bruges. I stood there for almost a full minute before anyone noticed me. My mother saw me first. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. She said, "Darling, you look exhausted. Why don't you sit? We were going to talk to you about this after dinner anyway." I asked her to explain. She put her phone down with the kind of slow theater she's been performing my whole life. She said, "Hadley, you know I love you, but your sister has a presence. She photographs well. We have press coming from 3 magazines, and we just felt, your father and I and the senator, we felt it would land better. The brand of the family, you understand. You're brilliant behind the scenes. You always have been. Let Brooklyn have the stage for once." For once. As if Brooklyn hadn't given the wedding toast at every family wedding for the past decade. As if Brooklyn hadn't been the one on the cover of the alumni magazine. As if Brooklyn hadn't been the face of the Whitaker name at every gala, every fundraiser, every Christmas card sent to 700 clients since she turned 21. I said nothing. I have a particular kind of nothing I do when I'm in a room with my mother. It's a stillness she has always interpreted as obedience. The senator clapped my mother on the shoulder and said, "She gets it, Margot, she always gets it." And my mother smiled at me like I'd just handed her a present. I went back inside. I went up to my room, and I opened the bottom drawer of the rolling suitcase I always travel with. And I took out the leather portfolio I'd been carrying with me to every family event for the past 4 years. Inside that portfolio is every signed page of the trust my grandfather left me. The directive authorities, the signatory protocols, the asset register, and one document, in particular, that I'd been carrying around the way some people carry a photograph of someone they've lost. It was a single-page resolution drafted by my attorney in Boston that I could sign at any time to freeze every disbursement from the trust pending review, every credit line, every property maintenance budget, every account my family had been treating like an open faucet for 40 years. I'd carried it around for 4 years, and I had never signed it. I always thought I would. Eventually, if it ever got bad enough. I just didn't know what bad enough looked like. Sitting on the edge of the bed in that villa, listening to my mother's laugh float up from the terrace, I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the brass key. I thought about a night in February, when I was 8 years old, when my mother locked me out of the house in my nightgown because I'd interrupted a phone call. I slept in the gardener's shed behind the garage. There were no animals in it, but it was cold, and there were spiders, and I remember holding my own elbows and rocking back and forth so I wouldn't cry loud enough for the neighbors to hear me. She came out at 6 in the morning and unlocked the shed and told me to go upstairs and wash my face before the housekeeper saw. She said, "If anyone asks, you got up early to read. We don't air our laundry, Hadley." I was 8. I nodded. I went upstairs. I washed my face. And for 26 years, I never told a single human being. Not my father, not my therapist, not the man I almost married. No one. I sat on the bed and I thought about the shed. I thought about every birthday Brooklyn had been given the cake on her side of the table while mine had been left in the kitchen. Every Christmas, she got the front row in the photograph and I got the corner. Every time my mother said, in front of company, "Hadley is so dependable, Brooklyn is the one with the spark." And then I did something I hadn't done before. I called my attorney, Felicity, in Boston. It was almost midnight her time. She picked up on the second ring. I asked her if the freeze directive was still drafted and waiting in her files. She said it was. I asked her what would happen if I executed it tonight. She said, every Whitaker line item, properties, credit, the senator's monthly retainer, the staff payroll on 3 continents, the foundation's operational reserve, would be suspended pending a forensic review until I personally lifted it. She said it would take about 6 business hours to propagate through the banks. She said, "Hadley, are you sure?" I said I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. I told her I needed one carve-out, the literacy program. I wanted it spun off into a separate vehicle, transferred to a different trust I'd been quietly setting up for 2 years, fully funded for the next 15 years. She said she could do it before sunrise. I signed the directive at 11:47 p.m. local time. I scanned it. I sent it to her. I closed the portfolio. I put on my robe. And I went downstairs to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. And I sat in the dark and watched the lake. The gala was the next evening. I came down at 6. I wore the dress my mother had told me 2 months earlier was too understated for the photographs. I put my hair up the way my grandmother used to wear hers. I went into the ballroom. I found the seat I'd been reassigned to, which was at a table near the back with 3 foundation board members and an empty chair where my +1 would have been if I'd brought one. The head table was full. Brooklyn was in the center, beside my mother. There was a place card with a stranger's name where my chair had been. A woman I didn't know, who turned out to be a fashion editor my mother had been courting for 6 months. I sat at my back of the room table, and I drank water, and I waited. My mother gave her welcome speech. The senator gave a toast. The string quartet played. Brooklyn stood up to deliver the foundation keynote. She had 3 pages of notes I'd written for someone else to read. She read them badly, in a voice that wobbled around the word literacy, like it was a foreign capital she'd never visited. The press in the back of the room took pictures of her. And then, at 9:14 p.m. local time, which was 3:14 p.m. on the East Coast, the calls started coming. I watched it happen from my table. The senator was the first. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face did something I'd never seen it do before. He stood up, walked behind my mother's chair, and whispered in her ear. She turned around like he'd slapped her. Her hand went to her throat. She looked across the room for me. I was already looking at her. Brooklyn was still talking. She didn't notice. She was getting to the part of the speech where she was supposed to introduce the silent auction. My mother stood up in the middle of it. She crossed the ballroom, past 200 guests, in heels she could barely walk in, and she came to my table. She didn't sit. She didn't lean down. She just stood beside my chair, and in a voice that the foundation board members all heard, she said, "What did you do?" I said, "I did what I was hired to do, Mother. I exercised trustee discretion." She said, "You've embarrassed us." I said, "No, you did that yourself. About 4 years ago, I just stopped paying for it." She stood there for what felt like a very long time. Brooklyn finally noticed something was wrong and stopped mid-sentence. The room got that specific kind of quiet that only happens when very wealthy people realize they're watching something they're not supposed to be watching. My mother's hands were shaking. I saw a small muscle work in her jaw. She said very quietly, "You wouldn't dare cut off your sister." I said, "I didn't cut off my sister. I cut off all of you, including the people who used to be my friends and forgot to call me when you started erasing me from your dinner parties 3 years ago, including the senator's house in Sardinia, which I have been paying for, including the vineyard, including the apartment in the 7th arrondissement that has never had my name on the lease but has been billed to my office every month since Brooklyn turned 26. I said, the foundation is safe. I moved it. The literacy program will be funded for 15 years exactly the way Grandpa wanted, and you can't touch it. I said, everything else is frozen until I personally sign to release it. And I am not going to. She looked at me like she didn't know me, which was honest in a way. She never had. She said, "Hadley, people are watching." I said, "I know." Then I picked up my water glass, and I stood up, and I walked out of the ballroom. I walked past Brooklyn, who was holding the microphone like it was a hot pan, and past the photographer from the Italian magazine, who, to her credit, did not take my picture. I walked through the foyer where Allegra was standing with her tablet pressed to her chest again, and I put my hand on her shoulder as I passed, and I said, "Allegra, you did nothing wrong. Send me your invoice." I walked out the front door of the villa and down the path to the dock, where I sat on a wooden bench and watched the water for a long time. I didn't cry. I had cried a lot of times in my life. But I didn't cry then. I had something else. I felt the way you feel when you set down a bag you didn't know you'd been carrying. The next morning, the calls started. Brooklyn called twice. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that started with, "You have ruined my life," and ended with, "You've always been jealous of me." And I listened to it once, and then I deleted it. The senator called. He left a voicemail in a voice that sounded almost reasonable, almost paternal. He said, "Hadley, let's not be hasty. Let's get on a call. We can fix this." I didn't call back. My father called. My father, who has spent 4 decades of marriage to my mother in a kind of permanent fog, sitting in his study reading sailing magazines and letting her run our lives. My father, who once told me when I was 12 that I was the steady one, and who has never once stood up for me in a room with my mother. He called and he left a message that just said, "Hadley, pick up, please." I let it ring out. My mother didn't call for 2 days. When she finally did, she called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I wanted to see what she would say. She said, "I want to talk about your grandfather." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "He never wanted this. He never wanted you to use the trust like a weapon." I said, "He gave me the trust because he knew you'd use it like a credit card. He told me, the year before he died, that the day I had to freeze it would be the worst day and the best day of my life. So no, Mother, I think this is exactly what he wanted. He just hoped I'd never have to do it." She started to cry. I had heard my mother cry maybe 4 times in my life. Once when her own mother died. Once when Brooklyn was diagnosed with a hairline fracture in her ankle. Once when a journalist wrote something unflattering about her in a society column. And now, she said, "You don't understand what you've done to your sister." I said, "Tell me." She said, she had to give up the apartment in Paris. She had to fire the housekeeper. She's been crying for 3 days. She doesn't know how to do this, Hadley. She doesn't know how to live like a normal person. I said, "Then it's time she learned. She's 31 years old." She said, "You always hated her." I said, "No, Mother. I loved her. You hated me. There's a difference." There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "What is it going to take for you to release the funds?" That was the moment I understood that nothing had actually changed for her. She was crying because she was inconvenienced. She was apologizing because it was a transaction. There was no part of this conversation where she said, "I'm sorry," without a price tag attached. I said, "Nothing is going to take it. I'm not releasing the funds." I said, "I'll give you and Brooklyn each a one-time disbursement. Enough to find an apartment, get on your feet, hire a financial advisor. After that, you're on your own. The senator is on his own. Dad is taken care of, separately, through a vehicle he set up before he married you, which I just realized is the only smart thing he ever did." I said, "I'm not your daughter anymore in the way you've used that word. I'm not the dependable one. I'm not the quiet one. I'm not the quiet one. I'm not the one who pays. I'm a person, Mother. I have been a person the whole time. You just never bothered to find out who." She hung up. That was 11 months ago. She has tried to reach me 3 more times since. Once through a mutual friend, once through an attorney, who very politely told my attorney that there was no legal basis for the request and that he'd advised my mother not to pursue it. Once, on a Wednesday in March, she showed up at my apartment in Boston. She stood in the hallway and she said she wanted to apologize. I let her in. I made her a cup of tea. I sat across from her at my kitchen table and I waited. She apologized for 90 seconds. Then she spent 25 minutes explaining how she was the real victim of the whole situation, how her mother had been cruel to her, how she had done the best she could, how she'd been under so much pressure, how Brooklyn was just a sensitive person who needed protection, how I had always been so capable that she'd assumed I didn't need anything from her. I let her finish. I asked her if she'd like more tea. She said yes. I poured it. I sat back down. And I said, "Mom, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm not angry anymore. I haven't been angry for months. But I am also not coming back. I'm not your fixer. I'm not your wallet. I'm not your daughter in the way you need me to be. I'm a person who has my own life now. And that life does not include picking up your phone calls. I hope you find peace. I really do. I just can't be the source of it." She put down her teacup. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "You sound just like your grandfather." I said, "I know." She got up and she left. I haven't seen her since. Brooklyn moved to Atlanta. She got a job in events. From what I hear, she's actually pretty good at it. She doesn't speak to me, which is fine. I send her a birthday card every year because that's what my grandfather would have wanted, but I don't expect anything back, and I don't get anything back, and that is also fine. My father and I have lunch once a month. He never mentions my mother. He talks about boats. I let him. We have a quiet thing now that we never had before, and I think he is, in his own muffled way, grateful. The literacy program funded 18 new schools this year. The board sent me a photograph of one of the libraries in Tennessee. There's a brass plaque on the wall. It has my grandfather's name on it, and underneath, in smaller letters, it says, "Founded in memory. Sustained in defiance. I asked them to add the second line. They didn't ask why. Here is the thing I want to say, because I know some of you are going to comment that I waited too long, that I should have done this when I was 25, not 34. That I was foolish to spend a decade paying for people who didn't love me. You're not wrong, but you're also not me. You didn't sleep in the shed when you were 8. You didn't watch your grandfather press a brass key into your palm. You didn't spend 19 years convincing yourself that being needed was love, because nobody ever showed you the other kind. I figured it out when I figured it out. I'm not going to apologize for the timing. The timing was the timing. The freedom is the freedom. And the freedom, in case anyone is wondering, is worth every dollar I will never see again. You are allowed to take your name back. You are allowed to stop paying for people who edit you out of the photograph. You are allowed to be the quiet one in a room full of louder people and still be the one holding the key. And when you finally turn that key, you are allowed to walk away without looking back. I walked. I'm still walking. The lake is behind me and the light is in front of me, and my name, finally, is mine. I think about that night on the dock more often than I expected to. The water, the bench, the sound of the Gala still humming faintly through the villa windows behind me. I remember being surprised that I wasn't crying. I remember thinking, this is what people mean when they say they feel light. Here is what I have learned in the 11 months since. The reason my family did what they did was not because they were monsters. It was because for 34 years, nobody, including me, had ever told them no in a way that cost them something. Every action has a consequence. Every consequence eventually finds its way back to the door it came out of. My mother edited me out of the photograph because she had been editing me out of her life since I was 8 years old, and the world had never once pushed back. The night I signed Felicity's directive, I wasn't punishing her. I was just letting the law of cause and effect finally do its work. You cannot spend 40 years draining a well and then act surprised when the well runs dry. What I want anyone listening to understand is that quietness is not the same as weakness. For most of my life, I confused the two. I thought that because I didn't fight, I wasn't strong. I thought that because I paid, I was loved. I had it backwards. Real strength is not the noise you make. It is the steadiness with which you hold a brass key for 19 years, knowing what it can do, choosing not to use it until the day comes when using it is the only honest thing left. I also want to say this. Walking away is not the same as giving up. Brooklyn is in Atlanta now, learning how to be a person who pays her own rent, and I genuinely hope she becomes someone she can be proud of. My mother is, as far as I know, still telling people that I betrayed her. That is her story to tell. It is not mine to correct. The grit it took to sign that page came from somewhere I didn't know I had. It came from the 8-year-old in the shed. It came from the grandfather pressing the key into my hand. It came from every small no I never said out loud, gathering like rain in a cistern, waiting for the right night to break. If you are the dependable one in your family, the quiet one, the one who pays, I want you to hear me. You do not have to keep funding a life that doesn't have a seat for you. Goodness does not mean self-erasure. Wisdom is not the same as endurance, and the day you finally choose yourself is not the day you become selfish. It is the day you become a whole person. I waited a long time to learn that. You don't have to wait as long as I did. The lake is still there. The key is still mine, and my name, finally, belongs to me.